Welcome to today's Energy Central Power Session entitled Rethinking Priorities, Bold Utility Leadership. Before we begin, I'd like to take just a moment to thank HSI for making today's event possible. We really appreciate their sponsorship. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to our moderator for today's event, Mike Smith, to kick things off. Mike, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Great. Thanks, PJ. Thank you to our panelists, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got a lot of good stuff to cover today, and we're going to jump right into it. And in the way of a briefest introduction, my name's Mike Smith. I've been in the industry for about 35 years, and just really fascinated about things that are happening today in terms of the shift that touches kind of everything that a utility does. So we'll be diving into some of that today, particularly around how leaders need to be positioning their organizations to be prepared for a lot of what's going on. So with that, we're going to get into just a few opening remarks. PJ, yeah, there you go. You know, as an industry, we got a lot of challenges. And when you step back and look at everything from power generation and how that's changed, how power is being delivered, the regulatory landscape, the workforce and those changing demographics, it's really touching everything. And we're going to hit on a lot of that today. Some of it from a 30,000-foot level, and other things we're going to drill down into. As we do that, as PJ said, please do put your questions into the chat. We will do our best to incorporate all those into the discussion. We really like that, so don't be shy and dive in. Next slide, please. This is just the first of a few slides that we're going to share with you all just to paint the picture a little bit of what's going on in the industry, and a lot of you will be aware of this. Of course, the demand growth, the load growth that we're seeing happening right now, driven by electrification, AI and data centers, it's all really starting to hit the industry, and utility leaders really need to be prepared for this. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. And, you know, this is not something that's on the margin of how utilities operate. This is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So we will definitely be touching on that in our session today. And this is really kind of part two of that story, where not only is the demand growing, but that generation mix is changing. And again, I think we're all in the industry, we're all aware of the growth of renewables and the opportunities as well as the challenges that that represents. What's interesting is I've had several people in the industry, I spend a lot of time interviewing people, and they talk about, well, you know, we had massive load growth in the 60s. You know, air conditioning was coming online. We figured it out then, we'll figure it out now. Well, conditions are a little different now, because in the 60s, we weren't really trying to reinvent how the utility generates and delivers energy to its customers. So there's kind of a double whammy here for us in terms of the load growth and the shift in generation. And again, this is something that leaders are working on, and all the folks are working on in our industry. So let's see how this plays out, and we'll touch on this today as well. And then finally, we're going to talk about the workforce. I think we're all aware that we're at an interesting point in time where the baby boomers are either out or on their way out. I'm on the tail end of that, and we have a new generation coming in that has different expectations and different needs. And just to cite a few of these things that actually the folks from HSI shared with us in the run-up to today's session. Newer folks coming in, they see that culture is very important to them. It matters in terms of how they're going to go about their work and make their decisions. They also expect to be trained. So I think that's something that you're going to have to build into how you're running your organization. Unfortunately, almost half of new hires fail in the first 18 months. And according to the U.S. Department of Labor, that's very expensive. And I think we've probably all experienced that. So this is just a few of the challenges at a very high level that we wanted to kind of share with the audience today to make sure that everybody was on the same page as we dive into some of these things. So what we're going to do now is kind of jump into the discussion that we've been preparing for. We're very lucky to have a really good panel today. I've gotten to know all these folks a little bit in the run up to it and working on some other projects with them. And I'm going to introduce each of them individually and ask each of them an opening question, and we'll go from there. So our first panelist today is Ahmad Ababneh. He's a Senior VP of Operations at Veridon. He has over 30 years of experience in electric utility operations and engineering. Ahmad has led transformative initiatives at major utilities, including PG&E, where he oversaw electric transmission and substation operations. His leadership in grid modernization and reliance continues to shape the future of the energy infrastructure. Ahmad, thanks for joining us today. I know I've worked with you a little bit in the past. PG&E is kind of tip of the spear of a lot of the changes we see happening today. And again, it's technology, it's regulatory, it's workforce. So during your time when you were a senior operations executive at PG&E, you really had a front row seat to all these things happening. So when all of the dust settles around the regulatory things within, say, the state of California with its PUC, at the federal level with all the changes with a new administration, people in leadership positions like what you held at PG&E, you're going to make this work in a very complex environment. So I'm giving that charge. So if you could give one piece of advice to a regulator in today's environment, what would that be to make sure they're helping you all meet your operational goals, be a little bit more realistic perhaps? What would that look like if you were sitting across the table from some regulators and saying, you know, we get it, we understand, we work in a regulated industry, but here's something, or here's a few things that would really make our lives a lot easier in terms of us being able to execute on our mission and being compliant with what you all see as important.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike, and thank you to Energy Central, HSI, for the opportunity to be with this distinguished panel. As for the question, I'm not sure if I'm in a position to give regulators any advice here, but I just kind of, my observations over the past 20, 30 years or so on building a constructive relationship. Obviously, the regulators play a crucial role in supporting the utilities' operational goals. And while they balance, of course, the public interest in keeping the public safe, the rates affordable. As a matter of fact, these are some of the key KPIs, key objectives for any utility in the country, and we share the same interest. I still say we as a utility executive here, but I think the utility also play a role, and the utilities need to your point, have open dialogue, embrace the love-hate relationship that existed for years between the regulators and the utilities. But here are some specific things and specific to meeting operational objectives. I think we all can benefit, both regulators and utilities, from educating our own staff on the role of the regulators in this ecosystem, in this business model, explain the why behind what. I think that will help bridge some of the gaps and clarify a lot of misunderstanding. We always have to find the common goals and align policies, which are what most of the regulators are in charge of, with the objectives. As I mentioned, find those shared goals and objectives from, public safety, of course, co-workers and employees safety for the utilities, people who are also customers closer to the infrastructure that we obviously build and operate, and then align these objectives. I think a key also observation, when the utilities and the regulators collaborate early in the policy making and shape those policies so they become like successful outcomes, I think both win. So those policies at the end of the day to serve objectives that communities, obviously, regulators, legislations, and I think we need to kind of make sure that there is a collaboration. There is also a transparency in the process that would help both, being able to align on the, what are the interests of the regulators, what are the interests of the utilities, and find those, common grounds. One thing I think the regulators probably can do more of, and in a way encourage the utilities to be more innovative, is encouraging R&D. The utility space spend probably the least amount of R&D money in similar industries, and I think the regulators can play a critical role in encouraging those R&D programs, pilot programs, and of course with that comes the authorizing the funding by allowing the utilities to basically recover some of these funds or have a shared model. There's a great example in the state of California with the CPUC and the Energy Commission where there is a whole epic program where I think it's one of the probably the best I've seen in the industry that allocate a significant R&D dollars for new technology, new processes, and we can obviously do more, especially when we are seeing huge advancements in technology, AI, other things that we can benefit from. Another example I think the regulators can do, and this is across the country, is look at the current challenges and have a sense of urgency. Regulations tend to be lagging a lot of the needs for the systems, the needs from a climate change, being able to come with these regulations earlier, and that through collaboration and create incentive programs. Another good example is really around the wildfire mitigations and how the CPUC allow the utilities to basically invest in wildfire mitigations, cut a lot of the red tape, create some of the memorandum accounts to be able to recover those. Obviously, those are critical components in great partnerships. Another thing, I think, take a long-term view of policies and regulations. Some of these policies could be a reaction to a certain political situation. I think we all can benefit from the CPUC taking that long-term view on, whether it's an asset investment or request. And we have assets, and we build assets that we expect to last, way beyond our lifetimes, 50, 60, 100 years. So having these policies to align at least with the life expectancy of these assets. Back to you, Mike.
Yeah, boy, a lot there. I was keeping some notes. I'm going to revisit a few of those with you because I think we're at a really interesting time in that utility to regulator relationship, given where we are in the energy transition. I think there's some interesting developments there. I may want to revisit some of that with you, but that was a great start. So thanks for that. Our next panelist we're going to jump over to is Dylan Bearce, who's the Senior Director of Energy Resource Operations at Tucson Electric Power and Unisource Electric. In that role, he oversees natural gas and oil-fired gas turbines, RICE, combined cycle and conventional steam turbine generators, wind, photovoltaic, and bulk energy storage systems across Arizona and New Mexico. Wow, that's a lot. His responsibilities include regulatory compliance, engineering, operations, maintenance, finance, thermal plant development, and safety. He's also the lead for the CAISO energy and balance market participation for the generation fleet. He has a total of 25 years of experience working at these large utilities, and he holds, as well as Southern Cal Edison, he holds 3 journeyman cards, has a business leadership degree from University of Arizona, and has numerous industry certifications and is an active volunteer in the Tucson community. So Dylan, thank you for joining us. And we definitely want to tap into some of your expertise here. So, I use this term in talking with Ahmad about PG&E, but in your role at Tucson Electric, you're also tip of the spear with the energy transition. You've got this generation fleet, you're seeing the generation mix change. So as you look at this and the changing technology, both in terms of the generation itself and the technologies where you're managing a lot of this, there's a lot going on there. And of course, you put the people into the mix, that's also makes it even more interesting. So looking at your generation fleet, the technology to manage that, and the workforce, when you look at that workforce, what do you see happening there in terms of changes in expectations, changes in skill sets? Is there alignment between this new generation mix and this newer workforce? Where do you see that today? Where do you see it heading? And are there some needs that are more acute than others?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I want to just extend the same thanks to Energy Central and HSI for this opportunity. I'll say it is not how it was when I started. And I don't think it's going to stay the way it is right now. And so what I would say that the major changes are for some of the conventional steam turbines, mechanical, welding, conventional machinists, you could hire those skill sets. The military had a very strong presence of that. A lot of folks would spend their 4 years, get qualified, and you could just inherit the work ethic, the training, and you could just go get it. And it was pretty available. That well is dried up. Even how the military operates is different. Once you have skilled people, they can write their own check. It's very competitive. And so what you find is the skills of yesterday, the skills of today may not be the skills in 2 to 5 years, which is when people typically peak, right? And so I would say your recruitment strategy now looks more like an aptitude assessment of, are they capable of change? Are they able to critically think, not just know how to perform a task because that's what the procedure reads? And so when we look at the changing needs and the changing fleet, and every time we get into new administration or a new strategy or an investment mix, the direction changes. And it's good for industry. It's very difficult for people. People don't typically like change. And so that aptitude and ability to kind of go with the ebbs and flows of the necessary skill sets and the changing technology and times, I would say that's a lot of what the workforce changing and the assessments of even the onboarding process includes. And so that real strong look at the aptitude is probably one of the biggest. Aptitude and attitude that we always joke about, but that's probably one of the biggest. The acute stuff, I'll tell you, there's some trades that are just tough. Engineering, electrical and controls, the instrumentation technicians. There's just some jobs that are very difficult to recruit, retain, and have folks that are willing to do the wide variety of work that's needed to maintain an old fleet, learn the new fleet, constantly upgrade and retrofit things. And so, I would say, yeah, being on the front end and leading edge is really exciting, but it's very hard to characterize people that fit the unknown. And so I think that wide lens, long range plan to forecast what the expectations may be, and people that are prepared for it to be something different is a big challenge that we're all faced with and working towards solving day by day, I would call it.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a few follow-ups for you. I'm going to ask just one right now. We'll come back to some of these. So you mentioned some of the electrical controls, engineering skill sets are harder. So in your career span there in the organization, how has that changed in terms of how you're getting those skills? It maybe before it was more passive, now it's more active. Are there formal programs with junior colleges or universities or other types of training that's out there?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a mixed bag. I would say for engineering, the partnerships span beyond the state, right? And so you're starting to recruit much wider. Some skill sets have different presences, a different community or, 4-year institutions. So you got to kind of look at the skill sets, the strengths, and get in early, I would say. Don't try to catch them as a graduating senior and see if you can snag them up. You got to hit them and start early. But there's a lot of internships. There's a lot of sometimes even contract temp labor. The engineers are struggling to find work because they don't have the experience. And so there's probably a hybrid in that to bring them in as associate engineers prior to graduating and getting those technical skills. And then there's some of these staffing entities that have pretty decent programs we partnered with over the years to strengthen that and have them work with more seasoned folks. For the more skilled trades, technician type folks, I would say that we found we had to grow our own. And so we found that state registered apprenticeships where those are possible. Not all job classifications fit well within different states, jobs that you could classify, and then certification programs. But what we found is that's slow. And so we've had this big bubble pop of all the boomers retiring, people staying at utilities less. And so we found that we've even partnered with outside, Mark, I'll kind of point to you. We've partnered with other entities to develop assessment tests to try to expedite and accelerate, not training people on what they already know and just doing gap assessments to try to be more targeted and get them up to speed quicker so that they can get that on the job field experience quicker and be more productive employees, which is what they want anyway, right? They don't want to feel like they need somebody there. And so some of these programmatic approaches have been good. We've also done some programs with some of the federal grant money and partnered with adjacent utilities. You can train them all, you can partner with them, but you can't hire them all. And not all skill sets fit all entities or the current need. And so having that larger pool of candidates, the larger geographic needs, and alignment on the transferable skill sets and credentials, that's been really powerful for the generation of interest. And we've got a lot more diverse candidates from that. So I would say those are a few areas that I think are part of helping it, not only for the society, but also for us able to recruit and sustain our workforce across the fleet.
it's nice when you can create those win-wins for sure. Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Dylan. We're going to move on to our third panelist. And before I introduce him, I'll just again say thank you to his organization, HSI, which is making not only today's session possible, but HSI is also supporting a year-long research project of which this session today is a part of. So HSI has partnered with Energy Central and Utility 2030 Leadership Collaborative on this year-long research program that some of you may have heard about. We have a new blog coming out every month. We have our annual research report coming out in about 6 weeks. I'm working on it right now, and we're real close. It'll go into an editing and production phase. And Mark has also participated in a previous virtual session called a Power Talk. So you may want to find that on Energy Central as well. And he'll be presenting at Utility 2030's Spark event with me up in Seattle in September. So we'd love to see you all join us there, or pull off any of these other resources and let us know what you think. So thank you, Mark, and the HSI organization. And in introducing you, let me just give our audience, say, a little bit of background. You bring more than 25 years of experience developing and delivering effective training solutions for the power industry. After earning your environmental biology degree, you began your career at a power plant in North Dakota, working with permitting and training requirements that came along with the release of the Title V emissions regulations. It was there you discovered the passion for the power industry. Today, Mark leads HSI's Industrial Services Division, where he partners with customers to create customized, innovative training packages tailored to their unique environment and operational needs. So Mark, thanks again to you and the HSI organization. So we're gonna put you to work here with some of these questions. And again, it's been great working with you on the run up to this. I know I've learned more than a thing or two along the way. So in the run up, we've talked a lot about a lot of the training needs. So I also want to talk to you how that looks more specifically when you're looking at technical and field staff. I think field staff is something that utilities are really grappling with from some of the research work that we've done, and learned quite a bit about that. So as this longtime leader in the training space, where are those gaps that you see in the technical, or particularly with field staff? And Dylan touched on some of these. This might be a lot to ask you, but maybe you can provide an example or two that utility leaders should be aware of. So where are those gaps, and where have you seen organizations, maybe through just good old hard work or innovation, be able to fill some of those gaps?
Yeah, so thank you for all the thank yous. You're welcome. And thanks, Dylan, for stealing about half my answers, but we'll get into that. So,
we'll get them back later.
I know. So, and one of the biggest, the biggest gap, and Dylan touched on this, is just the speed of your workforce. It's that more of that aptitude, and I kind of define it as integrating a technology and the digital fluency of the workforce. As we're setting on a whole bunch of new technologies. We've got a workforce that, let's put it, pretty be frank, that the utility industry was going to be on cruise control from the mid 1970s till the end of the 1990s.
Sure.
And then we started adding alternate generation, and now it's just really kicking in. Now we got smart grid, we got AOI, we got Internet of Things. We're trying to put all that on a workforce that was never trained or hired to do that in the first place. So now when we're replacing that workforce, we, our hiring methods, or our testing and all that, all has to be completely different. And then it's really like our training systems, our training programs aren't set up to deliver that. You look at, Dylan talked about state apprenticeship programs. We've got power companies out there that have state apprenticeship programs that haven't been touched since the 1970s. They submit, hey, this is an apprenticeship program for a millwright, and that's what it is. And then all this technology comes along, and none of that training was in those programs leading up to that. And it takes years to get those things changed, not because of just the way the process works. And so, a lot of that is that, and then it's just attracting that next generation. How do you do that? These generations coming in don't pursue jobs that seem like they're based on processes and manual standards and things like that, and and just a stagnant industry. And which the power industry is not. And so reframing ourselves as an industry, as an innovative, technology-driven industry, that's what needs to happen to actually get the, some of these younger generation actually look at some of these jobs that are in this market. And that's where we need to go next. And then, you hit that one slide about culture is a big thing. And this culture of continuous learning has to be applied across the industry, because one, it's required because of how fast we're changing, and innovations coming through, and we're adding technology, and so it's a pretty easy culture change to make, and to sell, is that, hey, we are a culture of continuous learners. Our jobs are going to go. We're going to make this thing better, and that's just where we go. So those are some of the big gaps, because just the way that the industry got to be put, like I said, put on cruise control. It was really stagnant. It was easy. I can't say it was easy. It was hard work, but there was not. I mean, we changed out a few things here and there. Changing engineering drawings to as-built, and you've never really updated them after that. Well, now those drawings change almost annually. It seems like there's another capital project that comes into some of these older facilities. We're trying to get work with inside the regulations, whether it be EPA, NERC, and all those other things. So
you used a term I hadn't heard before.
What's that?
A speedier workforce, and I think you're talking about, it's a more digitally enabled workforce. But can you maybe expand on that just a little bit? What does that mean to, if I'm a director of maintenance at a utility? What does that mean? Is that I'm looking for someone who has those skills, or I recognize that we have to train them up?
It's going to be a combination of both. I mean, a lot of times, because of the fact that innovation is coming, and you want to look at other new technologies, you might be hiring for technologies not even in your facility yet, and then you also need to train sometimes for this technology before they get there. I don't know how many times we've seen, big engineering projects, and we've worked with, GE and Siemens on different engineering projects. They'll be doing the commissioning, and nobody at the facility is actually trained to operate all the new upgrades that they just did until after it's commissioned. Then we're going to train them to operate it. It's like where all that needs to be almost during the design phase. That's when the training programs need to be put into place. So.
Yeah, and that comes back to having the longer view, which is something that Ahmad had touched on when he was talking about the regulators, but I think that's true for the folks on the operations side as well.
Speedier workforce wouldn't be the right term, just a more adaptable. I mean, it just has to be an evolving workforce.
Yeah, and I think the same goes for leadership as well. Yeah, we hear a lot of terms like adaptability, flexibility, nimble, and I think today's environment certainly speaks to that. I can remember when I got into this industry 35 years ago, it was to your point, it was easier in terms of how you manage some of these processes, like control systems and SCADA systems. There was very much a paradigm of how you replace them every X number of years and what that looked like as technology evolved and standards evolved. And of course, the internet and doing things in a wireless environment and all that has changed pretty quickly now. And I think leaders really need to be very adept at being able to look at things from a different perspective. So yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. So thanks for that. I do want to go back to Ahmad and really get a little bit more into this idea, segueing off what we just covered around kind of the adaptability that's needed, the level of change that we're seeing. And I want to talk to you about it strictly from a leadership perspective. Having been senior operations executive at a massive utility at PG&E, what do you think those operational leaders should be focused on over the next 3 years to meet these challenges that are confronting them? And again, we've talked a little bit about what all these challenges are, but when you're sitting in that seat and you're responsible for, let's say in your case, the transmission grid or substations, what are those things that you really need to focus on to make sure you're in the right position 3 years from now as that renewable energy footprint grows, as the workforce continues to change, and who knows what the regulatory landscape is going to look like in 3 years? But what are those things when you were sitting in that seat that you had an eye on 3 years out, that you had to make sure that you and your organization were prepared for?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, that's really a big question, and there's so many things a leader can start with. And where do you want me to start? And thinking about it, just to break it down first, the fundamentals and the core of the utility business, frankly, has not changed in a long period of time. The beauty of a monopoly, at the same time, the downside of not having the incentive to reinvent. So, you know, we all in the same delivery business as utility, you know, leaders delivering electrons, deliver safe, reliable, affordable, and clean energy. Those are the fundamentals. So that hasn't changed. The way by which we're doing it obviously has changed. And so even though what we, you know, doing hasn't changed, but, you know, how we do it, how we go about it, I think needs to always evolve, needs to be looked at based on current challenges and try to turn some of these to opportunities. So when I look at how and what our operational leaders need to focus on, you know, first, take care of the basic blocking and tackling. You're not going to have a business, you're not going to have an asset unless that asset can deliver what's, you know, the purpose and then what's intended to do. To me, you know, the way by which we do that has been always a kind of core principle for me. Number one, we are people's business. So people, right? You really have to invest in people. Mark mentioned that, Dylan mentioned that. So investing in your people, making sure that they are, you know, tooled correctly, they're taking care of their personal safety as being, you know, core value for our industry. Making sure that we continue to look at the talent, as I think Dylan mentioned, you know, people who can be taking and carrying the torch for a long period of time. So recruiting, training is very, very important, it's very critical. You take care of your people, they take care of your business, they take care of the safety, they take care of the customers. Also, we have to understand, I mean, the needs of the, you know, workforce now is a lot different. Frankly, when I have my new Gen Z co-workers coming to the workforce, you know, I learned tons of them. I learned how to use AI more effectively, and we of course give them the foundation. So number one, as an operational leader, you really have to, you know, always anchor on the fact that there's no business, there's no utility business in my mind. I don't see any time where robots going to take over. So you're going to have to invest in people. Number two, really look at how technology can enable safe operational processes. We do have, when you look at drones technology, allow us to do a lot of these inspections, you know, change our work methods from doing higher risk activity, climbing poles, to potentially flying a drone. So as an operational leader, you really have to think about how we can take full advantage of that technology and tailor that to, you know, meet business objectives. And then processes. I think I'm a firm believer that you start with process. Any, you know, as I mentioned, any decision we make with this business, you know, you expect at least 50 to 100 years that somebody else may have to live with it. So making sure that it's a sustainable, and a few things that operational leaders can benefit from, including myself when I was in operation, is leveraging data more often, right? And not just the data that is raw data, it's really taking it to the next level, extracting actionable information from that. Operational leader definitely can benefit from taking this data-driven approach, and being able to meet these challenges in the future. Hopefully we'll talk, you already highlighted some of these challenges when it comes to the demand forecast and the huge growth that we are seeing now, and we continue to see probably for the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to have to be in a position to serve our customers, serve them well. After we take care of the infrastructure, we're transitioning from traditional one-way power flow. Some of us is in a different maturity, you know, in that process. So understanding these technical aspect of it, which goes back to how you ultimately leverage your teams, your people, you know, the technology and the processes, and I would add to that the data, intelligent data, actionable data, to really meet these challenges that, you know, here. They are here. I mean, we thought these things when, we used to talk about it just 2, 3, 4 years ago. It's like, oh, well, this is a 2030 view of it. But we found ourselves overnight having to deal with these issues in real time. And I think planning for that change and do it in a more measured way will definitely deliver safer outcomes, better results, and ultimately ensure success.
Okay.
Back to you, Mike.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff there. I have a couple of things I'm going to may come back to you on if we have enough time, because I think the transmission grid is super, super important. I think it's always been kind of almost assumed, and I think that's not going to work anymore. So I'm going to want to revisit that with you. But while we were talking here, we got a question from our audience in for Dylan. So Dylan, I'm going to read this to you, and then the floor will be yours. So it says, how do you retain the workforce or get employees who have the skills for running wind plants or operating bulk energy storage assets that requires more data analytics skills, e.g. arbitrage trading, than running a gas-fired turbine? So again, it's kind of the classic more electromechanical skills transitioning to perhaps more digital skills or just new equipment skills. How have you all navigated that?
Well, if I wish I had a really solid answer that I could say, everybody do this and it'll work. I'll tell you what we're doing, because it's a challenge, right? I mean, you don't stick a wind farm in the middle of the city, typically, right? And so you got your own challenges with being up on a mesa, typically kind of in the middle of nowhere. Employee retention in those areas, unless you're from there, can be a real challenge. And that's typically where a lot of these larger land requirement assets get built. And so
Right.
I would say it's a complicated answer. Fundamentally, I think we'll get back to culture for a second, is if it's a terrible place to work, you're probably not going to keep them. And so we focus a lot on work environment, employee growth, cross-training opportunities, critical skill development. And that's a big focus to help retain people. And I suppose one of the blessings and curse at the same time, at least in my role, is that I can be ADD all day and still be hitting a good priority. I can look at a wind farm in the morning and be talking combined cycle in the evening. And employees like diversity of work, they like growing and developing, but leaders got to kind of tie that back, right? Is why is that important? How does that skill set that you gained in a previous job or at your last facility you were working at to the new one? And I think drawing those lines and connecting those dots, especially for the less senior folks, is really helpful in retaining them. Interestingly, not everybody's into inverter-based technology. I'm an old coal guy, so I like the heavy steel, but it's new and exciting. It's on the headlines. That's where the announcements come in. So getting somebody interested in a large-scale battery project's pretty easy. The issue is it doesn't take a lot of people. And so when you only have so many resources, you're constrained and you've got all these other challenges, is knowing your people enough to know what interests they have and making sure that you're putting them in the right place without adversely impacting the business. And so when I tie all that together to the data analytics, et cetera, not everything's in the field. And so we have a lot of robust tools that you can look at real life operating data. You can look at dashboards, you can look at contractual obligations, like for batteries, it's round trip efficiency, what impacts that, and then tying it all into how the business acumen piece plays into it, which I'll call the business acumen. So most entities anymore have gone towards more of a market structure, right? Some are full-blown RTO, some are energy imbalance. I'll just leave it kind of high level to say that the way we used to make money with bilateral trading is faded off. And it's a complicated methodology, and depending on who you're trading with and what region you operate in, it's a different answer, because different services pay different money or don't pay at all. And so I think tying that back for folks helps them understand the importance of their mission, their decision making. They get to feel like they got more buy-in or stake in the outcomes. And I think the real life applications where it seems like, at least from my experience, people gain the most excitement. It's not solve for N because it just, here's a math problem. This is real life business. You can talk about the thing that you did today and the value it brought. And I feel like that's really helped with figuring it out, whether it's a gas turbine a wind farm, a solar array, you name it. I feel like the generalities in that can be tailored, but fundamentally that thought process is almost person to person. But generically speaking, I think at some level of education, connecting the dots has provided the most value, generated the most interest, and helped with retention in a lot of ways.
You know, you've actually started to answer the corollary question I was going to ask you, but I want to ask that. We do have another question from the audience that we're going to jump to in just a minute, so we'll get to that. But you touched a little bit about the mission, and I wanted to ask you, and actually I'll ask the whole panel as well if you all want to opine as well. But I think when I look at a large utility, which, you know, the big ones like where Ahmad worked and Dylan where you work, there's thousands of utilities. You know, what are some of the things that you all have either done or participated in or experienced where you're connecting that high level vision from the C-suite to that CSR in the call center, or that lineman out in the field, or that engineer who's working on a new substation design? What have you seen be effective in terms of keeping that workforce engaged, making them feel like and understand that they're part of the mission? What's worked, or maybe what are some things that you'd like to see that you haven't seen yet? So I'll ask you first, Dylan, but Ahmad and Mark, please feel free to jump in on this one as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say what we're doing is what we didn't do 15 years ago. So
okay.
I'll say that, you know, employee engagement wasn't a biggie. It was all pretty much transactional, right? Pump to be fixed, go fix it. There's an electrical fault, go find it and solve it. And now it has more to do with taking that 50,000 foot strategic level initiative that, you know, you spend days wordsmithing, and then making it make sense to the actual stuff that people are doing. It's hard to do, right? And to make it relatable of how do you relate it down? And so I would say employee engagement is what I would classify it as, has been huge. And that's about being face-to-face, being transparent, answering questions, and making time. In particular, the higher you go, the harder that gets, right? A lot of your decisions are done in groups, they're in meetings, you're extracted from the people that need the info. And so it's trying to cascade down the information at a level that makes sense given to who you're talking to. And that requires relationships, it requires engagement, understanding the operation and tying it back, but also having well beyond your own organization of what are the influences of this? Because you get a lot of headlines and most people don't read beyond the bold. And so you end up with a lot of suspicions. And I think tying it back to talk about how it may or may not apply and saying you don't know when it's unknown. I feel like a lot of people latch on to the juicy stuff, which may be inaccurate information, which is usually, you know, rumors spread pretty fast. And so I think the key is when you don't really know, you can't validate or write it off, you kind of just move on from that, but don't dismiss it. But bring in the things that you can. And most senior leaders have enough of a lens to do that. I think it's making the time to do that is really key.
Yeah, I think that was great. I think the key word in there was transparency. People will understand the why, which comes back to something that Ahmad had said in his opening remarks about people need to understand the why. And sometimes it's in the context of why you're doing something the regulator told you to do or mandated. In other cases, it's understanding why are we doing this project in the field today and how does that fit into the bigger picture? I think transparency is almost the operative word in this question. So that was great. And Ahmad and Mark, I'm going to ask if you wanted to add to that again in terms of connecting that workforce to the mission. What have you seen that's worked well, or what are some ideas you have around that?
I think it's just the general change in the corporate culture. I mean, remember, you know, 20 years ago, everybody just had a vision and a mission statement. That's what you had, and that's what we're doing. But you know, now we communicate out to the employees like, hey, what are all these? And I'll put it in training terms. What are all the enabling objectives and the skill sets that we need to get to this mission statement, and what supports that, and what drives that down? And you know, and just expanding on my earlier thing on one of the gaps is there hasn't been a focus until recently on soft skills, you know, for technicians, like communication skills, you know, all the stuff dealing with critical thinking, adaptability, things like that, like so they can actually effectively communicate down and between coworkers and talk about their issues and their problems and how to write an effective email and just communicate between the groups. And it, you know, and so that focus on soft skills is kind of coming along and showing up in some of these aptitude tests and things like that as we hire and as we train people. So And then there's also been kind of a change where we put a little more on merit, for giving promotions and, and skill sets, as far as just, there was a long standard tradition, you put your time in, and then where now it's, who's bringing the most innovation to our group and can make impact or change. So.
Good stuff. How about you, Ahmad? What have you seen in terms of connecting that high level vision that you lived with to all those probably thousands of workers in your organization?
Yeah, I think Dylan and Mark hit on really the two key objectives, or the key tactics. But I would say, I would add also, consider different communication channels, because you never can over communicate when you are reaching a large workforce, multi-layered, different classifications, all the way from the front line to your management team, your leadership team. To me, also be intentional about these communications. Be clear, and people need to understand the priorities, align on these priorities. So, in addition to communications, being able to explain the why, being able to show your team, your stakeholders, where the key objectives, where we are aligned. I mean, this industry runs really well, unfortunately, under emergency response, because everybody's clear on the goal here. We're restoring customers, and everybody's working their ass off to get that last customer restored. But when it comes to blue sky days, where things supposed to be normal, we kind of fumble all around. So I think clarity on the mission and the goal every day, all the time, is also important.
I agree 1000%, especially you raise a good point about different communications channels, because people receive information differently. So yeah, that's a good one. I do want to jump over to a question from the audience. And Mark, this one's for you. Given a spread of new and legacy systems, it seems that back training of skills will be important to deal with the legacy systems in the face of an emerging forward-looking training bias. So it's kind of a statement, but I think there's definitely a question in there as well in terms of how do you do that? So, okay, we've got this new SCADA system and it's digital this and digital that, but by the way, we still have a lot of old electromechanical things that it's communicating with. So, what are some of the things that you've seen in terms of what this person is calling the back training of skills, balanced with some of the more forward-looking things?
Yeah, and I think, trying to retrofit, some people in, and, Mikey, you and I think in our Power Talk, we talked about, skills inventories and, gap analysis and skills matrix and things like that. And really that the skill matrix documents and competency maps, I'll get heavy into competency maps, is, having those competency maps is critical. Like what are all the competencies required to do these jobs, do all the additional jobs, and then when you start doing skills inventories of all your employees, you can see, hey, where do these people fit? Where, what skills are they missing? So Dylan mentioned gap training. We're doing spot training, so we can get somebody up to speed, show quick ROI on that new hire. But you also have to do a legacy employee. Okay, new technologies. You look at his competency map, you look at his skills inventory, and then you take that employee and you just target those tasks that, those skills that they need to actually work on some of these new technologies. Because a lot of these skills do overlap between other systems. It's just now it's a different application. And so you're not always trying to reinvent the entire training program every time you add some technologies, because there's a lot of those underlying skills go into those new skill sets. And so that's why some of those tools and competency maps are critical. So I'm a big pusher of competency maps and aptitude tests and screenings and things like that. So
okay, yeah. So I want to make sure I have some of this new jargon new to me. Competency map is more organizational. Skills inventory is more looking at the individual skill sets and how those align with the competency map. Is that a fair statement? Okay.
Yep. Skills inventory is the individual and how they compare to that full competency map. So you can actually spot those gaps and you can just target train, because nobody wants to come in, like Dylan said, you get hired for a job and that you're 80% qualified for or 80% competent. They don't want to be retrained on the 80% they already know, nor do you want to spend the money on training them on that 80%. You want to give them that 20%, get them up to speed and make them a productive workforce, productive in your workforce.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I got a few more here I wanted to ask you all individually, and we have a few for the entire panel that I want to get to in just a moment as well. I do want to come back to Ahmad. Ahmad, you know, with your background in transmission, and I got to ask you a question. So we spend a lot of time with Utility 2030 researching kind of the landscape. And sometimes we get into technology, sometimes it's more people-centric. We spend a lot of time with leaders learning about their priorities and things. And when I come to this energy transition that we're all in, and all the benefits and opportunities therein, but also its fair share of challenges as well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the transmission grid, where it sits today, what will it look like in 3 years? Will it be what is needed to move these electrons from these big solar farms, wind farms, to population centers? Is it going to get there, and what will it take to get us there? Because I think that's pretty well documented that is often kind of the choke point, if you will, in our energy infrastructure, is that transmission grid as more renewables come online. So I would just love to hear, and I think this is good for our audience as well, because it's very relevant to what we're looking at and staring down as an industry. How's that transmission grid going to perform for us, and what do we need to do to get there?
Thank you, Mike, for the question. I mean, when you look at the transmission specific, you know, probably gone through a lot of uncertainties from policies, deregulation, underinvestments for the last 30 years or so. So, you know, what's going on right now, which is the current issue, frankly, in my last role at the PG&E, others in our industry, we are, as a utility now, struggling to connect large load, obviously driven by, you know, data centers. The growth we are seeing on demand from electric vehicle charging infrastructure, electrification across the industry. As you probably know, that major cities, the city of San Francisco, San Jose, and others, you know, all new buildings. The building code now requires electric appliances, everything electric, and transitioning away from gas. And I think a lot of these policies that have been put on, you know, mandates of clean energy, carbon reduction, of course, accelerated a lot of these things that the utility, frankly, have not planned for, or did not have the time to plan for. The other issue when you look at transmission, some of the additional challenges includes, you know, the permitting, environmental. The different states has obviously different. They do have different requirements for that. So a transmission project, which is a mind shift for me, you know, trying to permit and break ground on a transmission project is easily 2 to 3 years just to be able to start on your design construction. So putting all of this together, I think when you look at the transmission and the needs for the transmission system to support the forecast, not just the forecast, but frankly today, you look at the generation interconnections backlog, some of these public information, you can look it up by a utility. You know, data centers are in the queue for months and years trying to connect, with still putting a lot of demand on capacity, on providing that capacity. At the same time, the transmission system is frankly not, I mean, the misconception that these large towers and poles and thick conductors can withstand, you know, winds and wildfires, and the system is not as resilient. It's not a zero risk, I should say. So also having to invest in the resiliency and the hardening of the transmission electric system while trying to support the load growth. Our own, you know, at PG&E conservative forecast, we're expecting 70% and probably a little more now, the revised ones, growth in the next 5 to 10 years. So having to build now a transmission system that's gonna support climate change, bring in more renewables. By the way, a lot of the close by locations for wind farms and solar farms being developed for the last 20 years now is you have to go further and further from the load. Hence, you have to get, you know, your 300 miles of transmission, and and those are going to take a lot longer. So I'm not trying to draw like a kind of a gloomy day here for transmission. I think these could be great opportunities. So if I'm looking at the transmission investments happening across the country and creating, FERC 1000 order, was it like almost 10 plus years now, allowed the transmission build to happen and allowed competition, which is good for the industry. That actually kicked the utilities in the butt, so to speak, to try to do these projects, in a more cost-effective and better, timeline. And then, of course, we see, participation from industry that investing in these transmissions. So looking at the next 5 to 10 years, if I look at the landscape just around the transmission system, definitely going to continue to see double-digit growth in transmission builds, new greenfield projects, while we're trying to also upgrade existing, capacity, existing lines, existing infrastructure to add more capacity, take advantage of technologies, things like advanced conductors that can allow dynamic line ratings, can allow to utilize the same footprints, the same right-of-ways, the same potentially infrastructure to try to push more capacity. So that's on the capacity side. And then we'll continue to work towards making the transmission system safer to operate.
We actually got a couple more questions from the audience, and one of them I think you already partially answered. It was, how can we better utilize the existing infrastructure? I think you just kind of gave us a good list of leveraging technology, understanding the challenge, and also get to building. With all the NIMBYism and regulatory landscape and everything, that's not going to be easy. But Ahmad, if you or anyone else wants to speak to how can we better utilize this existing infrastructure, I think you've tapped on a lot of that already.
Yeah, one thing I may add, just to kind of, and I was focusing on transmission, but one way to optimize the current infrastructure is really to look at kind of the grid end to end. I mean, when you look at the grid, it's electrons, start with power plants, end with meters, but our planning and operations tend to be focused on silos and transmission generation. So looking at more of an integrated approach, integrated planning to understand the contributions of, distributed energy resources on the distribution. I mean, overall, when you look at the grid, it's underutilized. I mean, it's not fully optimized, meaning that we design and build to meet peaks. And I think allowing the grid to interact in a platform that, can show all the participants, DERs and others, and also some of the new technologies that allow customers to participate in that. Regulators do play a role here with things like time of use and trying to shift that peak or trying to flatten the peak a little bit, I think will allow us to get more out of the current system through these optimization tools. So my additional point, if I look at the grid from an end-to-end, looking at more of an integrated, holistic approach to how you look at the that landscape.
Yeah,
Mike,
yeah, please jump in.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think just one addition that's kind of a new wave, not as new for some larger companies, is just about every large utility. I would say vertically integrated, right? There's a level of this where you may just have a distribution company that may look at it different, but we all submit typically on a 3-year basis. I'll just use general figures here, an integrated resource plan, and that's our look, right? It doesn't include everything, but it includes part of our infrastructure, part of our growth, part of the stuff we can disclose. And there's all sorts of optimism that can't go in there, right? Because it's not a real formal plan, it's not founded, it's risky. And so the system integrated plan is kind of the new wave. So that includes all the way down to your distribution level, your EV stuff, your demand side management programs, which is stuff that a lot of groups never looked at. And so when we think about the transferable training, the different inputs, the subject matter experts are now getting more and more collaborative to form a better picture, and it's done on an annual basis. Because it changes. The moment you do it, it's wrong, right? It's just like buying a new computer. It's out of date the day you get it plugged in. And so I think that system integrated plan is going to be a major lift. It's a big mindset shift, but I think it's going to add a ton of value for each entity And it's probably at the entity level to then take whatever market or interconnections and agreements you have into consideration to better use the infrastructure. Because it's really hard to take somebody else's ability to do things and apply it to yours. You almost have to take the idea, study it, and then see what's feasible for you. And so I just wanted to add that in, that's starting to become a pretty strong initiative, that there's not a lot of expertise out there that really has it down. And I think that's going to tell the story better, and it's going to take probably at least a few years before we see some really good drafts of those where we can start leaning on one another and better understand the total system and electrification activities that are taking place.
Yes, and you know, one way I've heard it framed, and I've done some work in the space, is traditional planning and forecasting is top down, and now with the explosion of DERs, it's bottom up. You know, when X percent of your generation is going to be at the distribution level, not to mention the EVs and all the other things that are happening. Bottom up is where you're really going to get a picture into that, and of course, that's very data centric. Having the tools where you can ingest a lot of that data and being able to understand it and make those forecasts. So yeah, it's an interesting topic. I don't want to get too far afield on that, particularly because we have another audience question. But thanks for jumping in on those. Mark, I didn't hear from you on that, because I wanted to get to you on this next one. I wanted to start with you on this one. This is one for the whole panel, but I want to start with you because it deals not only with employees and training, but AI. So how are you seeing, either formally or informally, in a training and development environment, how are you getting employees prepared, trained up, understood in terms of how they're going to incorporate AI into their positions? And there's a lot of examples of that we've seen. You know, many utilities now have AI-generated chatbots for customer service. We're seeing AI doing things around asset management in a more predictive environment. So AI is the thing. So where are you seeing how utilities are getting their employees to incorporate that into how they're trained up and then how they're executing? And I'd love to hear from Ahmad and Dylan on that as well. But Mark, what are you seeing?
So one, you have to convince them it's not scary. So because AI is scary for a lot of people. But some of what we're doing is we're putting AI in some of the tools, like you know, like some of those competency mappings, and you know, where we look at we ingest, you know, what are the systems that are out there, and then we use AI to actually, okay, let's go through and start doing learning assignments. You know, hey, what skills are required to run this piece of equipment, and you know, in things like that, and then on our EHS side, you know, incident reporting and things like that, we've got some AI tools that we're starting to release as far as, you know, what are corrective actions and things like that, where you kind of work through work with the employees. So that's some of the things we're seeing in there. It's just, but yeah, just the slow adaptation of what you're seeing it in there. You know, employees are starting to get exposure into it, and just your email, you got your co-pilots and your chat GPTs that are in there. So people are starting to see that, hey, this isn't going to replace me. This is just a helpful tool, so I can actually spend more time with my critical thinking skills. And that's, you know, so it's, again, it's a mindset, you know, type thing you have to do in your culture. Like, you know, where are we going to apply it? Where's it going to help? I see it coming in a lot of the technologies where we've been running simulators for years, you know, now, you know, in the control system. You know, when are we going to start letting AI kind of run, you know, actually start making some of the smaller decisions and, you know, keeping things level, where then at that point in time, your operator actually needs to be higher level trained, because they need to actually oversee it, and they need to know what's going on every single process, like they should be anyway, but what's happening in the systems, and then to make sure AI as they're monitoring, make sure it's actually making the correct changes in the responses, because we all know in instrumentation systems and sensing, you know, a false signal could you know, when you start responding control systems to false signals, you got all kinds of issues. So just that level of operator training.
Okay, great. Dylan and Ahmad, what have you been seeing in your organizations where AI is now becoming part of the job? How are you all managing that?
I'll go. I think to Mark's point, once you get over and overcome the first initial, you know, change. I mean, like any change, right? People are worried, afraid, concerned about the change, because there are a lot of unknowns. And once you try to make those unknowns known and figure out the use cases and how AI can be a value add to your frontline, coworker, for your engineers and designers. It's not just about automating processes and, reducing headcount. AI has a value when you look at the value proposition and increasing the safety, right? Obviously the reliability. And my observation actually from, our frontline is not really as concerned, or, they surprisingly probably adapt to change a lot faster than, frankly, the C-suite. A lot of the change management that you struggle with in the utility space is not in the frontline. Frontline, we change their work plans every day, and they run on so many things. The changes really have to start from top level of the organization, right? Figuring out the strategy, not just throw stuff over the fence, and look at where the value add for AI. AI provides, valuable tools. It's another tool in the toolkit. It's not new to the utilities. The utilities done simulations, as Mark mentioned, in the SCADA space and the EMS systems, power plants, and we digitized a lot of the grid over the years. So this is another level where you can build that, additional intelligence. I'm not an AI expert. I think there are probably a lot more use cases that could potentially be useful, but don't be afraid of it. Communicate. The C-suite needs to understand it and how does add value to the business. And I think my observation is that the front line, once you see that, connection and what is in it for them, being more safe and provide them additional tools and in their toolkit, I think, for the most part, you will see a good acceptance there.
Good. Yes. More tools. Yeah, we shouldn't get too blown away thinking AI is going to take all of our jobs. But yeah, more tools in the toolbox. Dylan, how about you? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I don't want to belabor it too much, but I'll say that I think I'll emphasize the C-suite. So as executives, we're risk adverse. We're a regulated utility. Data is important. Security is important, and that's the lens. And when you take it out going, no, there's anomaly detection that's going to let me know that this temperature has increased over time and my job gets easier knowing I'm not doing PMs for no good reason. I'm not worried about security. I'm worried about efficiency and not being in a noisy, dirty environment as long. And I think that's an evolution. For us to get ready for it, though, I think to get to the heart of the question, the way I look at it is you got to set guardrails. It can't be everything, right? If every paper written in a collegiate environment was written by something else that was written by somebody else, how much are we learning? And so I think we could become numb to our own intelligence or the ability of our own intelligence. And so I think setting some guardrails of you can use it as a tool, it can be advisor, it can be very good at a quick search and filtering information, but there's limits to it. And I think every organization is going to have their own tolerance for it. If you're doing heavy R&D, it's probably perfect. If you're worried about real specific public-facing documents and intellectual property risk, you're probably going to look at it very different. And so I think that's the preparation, is to say, hey, these are our goes and no-goes, and there's ways to set up AI to where you don't have the same risk exposure of data leakage and things of that nature. Those are the sorts of things that, yeah, you got to have somebody telling you no at times, but the idea is not everything's a no, so that people can get the most value out of it as it matures and be part of it and understand that it adds value. We just have to choose which value we want to squeeze out of that lemon.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. And by the way, thank you to this audience. Great audience. We're getting questions coming in. We got another one here. And this one actually uses an acronym that I've not seen before. I think I can kind of guess it, but DHDRG. I'm thinking this has something to do with distributed energy resources. But if DHDRG, which I think is DERs or something similar, I didn't think there was an acronym I hadn't seen before, but learn something new every day. So if DHDRG displaces large distant wind and solar plants like we've been talking about, we will greatly reduce the need for both transmission of any kind and energy storage, even annual firming. So if we produce all the energy directly beneath the demand and load centers for both electricity and heat and for hydrogen fuel, do the electric utilities evolve to a distribution-only utility with little need for new transmission. Yeah, that would be a nice goal. I'd be interested to hear the thoughts on that. I think this can bring up all kinds of questions, from small modular reactors to the role of storage to economies of scale of doing things very big versus doing them in a more distributed way. So as we start to get close to wrapping up here, I think this is a great question to kind of throw out to the whole panel is, what does that look like? Will utilities be distribution only in the future? What does that look like?
Mike, if you want, I can jump in and start. Ahmad, are you good? I'll tee it up for your transmission.
This is pretty close. This is pretty close to your sweet spot. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll stay pretty high level with this one. I always look at the economics of this stuff and customer affordability, right? And if everything we do is on a rooftop, it's expensive and it's very risky and it's not as stable. And so I look at it from economies of scale. If we have to build 3,000 more battery sites or one battery site and one string of wires, it's more cost effective. And if we're tied to other systems, we've got redundancy and reliability, and it's higher in the air and it's more safe. And so there's a lot of value that comes from the economy of scale items. I don't know if the reduction in transmission is unreasonable. I think that's a valid thing if this were to take place. But typically those microgrids, those smaller distribution systems and things are done because they're at the end of a radio line and they're unreliable, or there's some other driver that pushes you to make that larger capital investment because of the sensitivities of that area, right? And so I'm using generalities on purpose, but I would say that I think there's a dose of that, and we'll see use cases of it. Do I see in the near term that happening? No. Most people want the energy. They want the light to turn on when they flick the switch, but they don't want to see it. And if you stick it in everybody's neighborhood, they will be mad at you. And the stakeholders are pretty outspoken about it. And so when you look at line siting, you look at plant siting, you look at the cost of making it more appealing, people don't want to pay that. They'll complain and they'll say they want it, but typically when they get the bill, they're like, wait, what's all this?
Right.
And I think that those are going to be the other pressures that are saying when the rubber meets the road, the conflict exists. And so I think sometimes this option will win out and it's the right move, and sometimes it won't, and that's the right move. So I think it will be a heavy dose, but I think it's less likely that the scenario presented is anywhere near term. I'm talking post 15 years before you start seeing this more mass, even globally, starting to occur. But Ahmad, I'd be curious your thoughts on that perspective and what you can add.
I think you said it really well. I mean, let me start by saying DERs do play a major role on the grid, right? Positive and negative, because DERs also don't come free without investments from the utility to, enforce or harden the grid or increase capacity on transformers to allow for two-way power flow. But let's not fool ourselves. I mean, the only thing why I put my 7.2 kW system 15 years ago because of subsidies, and I felt guilty because my neighbor who did not have it was paying for it or paying portion of it. Right. I mean, when these subsidies go, when we passed the last big beautiful bill, guess what? I think 100% follow the money. The economics are not there for distributed energy resources. Hence, the utility scale ones that would be still needed by the utility investments are the most economical ones. And I think as we continue to see more reductions, and which is the fair thing, the equitable thing to do, frankly, and the cost shift that DERs cost, we're going to see this leveling, and the plane is going to level between utility scale, renewables and non-renewables versus also the DERs. It is my forecast. I won't see that we're gonna just do an eBay transactional platform where I only have a distribution grid. I'm gonna put my excess capacity on the platform and somebody's gonna subscribe it in my lifetime. To me, it's like when 10, 15, 20 years ago people start shooting energy from satellites, and we talked about wireless electricity. I don't see it. I'm sorry, I'm an old-fashioned when it comes to it, because the economics are not there, the technology is not there to support it. And with this said, there is a good applications for DERs, and we should leverage those every possible way. but we're gonna use it for maybe wildfire mitigations. We do have remote grids, and we have, basically took overhead, risky lines, and we built microgrids with a lot of solar storage. And I think storage is a game changer for the battery storage is a game changer. Customer defection, I mean, the utilities need to wake up as well. As a customer, I do have an option. The customers may be able to ultimately figure out a way that they're not going to need the grid. But I think it's at least, few years, 15, 20 ahead of us. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's fun to talk about because it is very futuristic. And what the heck is all this stuff going to look like in maybe as few as 3 years or as much as 10 or more years? Yeah, so thank you from the audience for that one. It's good stuff to kind of ponder. I have a couple more I want to ask to the panel. Let's see if we have time for these. The first one is around the customer. We've talked almost exclusively, really more about the operational side of the utility, but that customer is pretty darn important, and his and her expectations are changing. If they can run their life from one of these, they have a whole new set of expectations in how they're going to work with or engage with their utility. I look at it as kind of this timeline where it went from being a very static customer who wrote a check once a month to hopefully being one that's not just engaged or has a good experience, but is actually participating with the utility, truly a partner. I've got my demand response program, the energy efficiency programs, and all the other programs that are out there. So that utility customer is not just someone who we can say, yeah, we're doing a lot of really good customer engagement work, which is important, but are you crossing that chasm to where they're actually participating with you? So this is a little bit of a different question, but how do you see that role of the customer being part of the shape, or how it will be shaped when you look at and think about the utility of the future? And this can encompass any one of your roles, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that role of the customer in this more kind of forward-leaning utility that we've been talking about today. Who wants to go first?
I'll give it a shot since I also close with the customer at the end, but I think customers, the good old days when customers just flip the switch, they don't want to worry about anything changed. I mean, customers now are active participants with what we are seeing in demand response. We talked about time of use tariffs. We also have customers who are producing energy now, whether through DERs, rooftop solar, battery storage. There are incentives now try to help customers to actually take up an active role. Customer engagement is key for it. I think what we have seen also, on behind the meter, smart appliances, thermostats, the smart meters, AMI, enabled a lot of that interaction, the two-way communication between the customer and the grid or the system. So yeah, we talked about the system, we talked about operations, but I think the customer at the end of the line, they're now more interested in the grid than ever. And when your conversations around the barbecue grill with your family friends start talking kilowatts, and that means that customers are more aware. So to me, the utilities can really help the customers by continue to do these customer outreach, educate the customers, because also when there is a vacuum of communication, people start filling it up with their own narratives. And I think there may be some misinformation out there on what the customers and how the customers can impact it. And I think by trying to shape some use cases and demand response, it should help the grid, it should help operations, and not just the customer. And then the other thing, our customers actually want to participate. Some of our customers are the ones that actually start, they could be your eyes in the field. There is a lot of customer interaction that allow utilities to get near real-time information. So really, customer engagement, customer collaboration has shifted from previously customers don't want to worry about it, to now customers are probably taking more active, engaged role in managing the electricity and helping also the utilities and the community meet their own objectives and goals.
Yeah. I'm sorry, it looks like Dylan, you were about to go. Go for it.
Oh, please go. Please go.
I was gonna touch on something you said, Ahmad. It's something you mentioned when you're at your neighbor's barbecue. This is an actual thing that happened to me. So it was actually pretty funny. We were having a get together, a next door neighbor, a lot of really great people. And, when it's a fairly large group, this group might be talking about something. And, I'm probably in a group talking about baseball or hiking or something. My wife's in a group and all of a sudden they start talking about their utility bill. And, so I'm standing off to the side and I'm kind of keeping my fingers crossed, thinking, oh, please don't drag me into this. And then I hear this, my husband works in utilities. I'll bet he can explain it. So I did jump into the discussion, and what they were curious about or concerned about really was the infrastructure fee on their bill. They had not seen this before. This is a few years ago, and I'm a SMUD customer, by the way, a very happy SMUD customer. And they had no idea what this infrastructure fee was, because most people don't really even look at their bill. But now people were starting, to your point, Ahmad, starting to look at their bills. And what's this thing? It wasn't there a few years ago, and oh, by the way, it's growing over time. So it was an opportunity to explain that to them, and you used the term communications vacuum, and I think that was a classic example of that, because I'm sure there could have been a whole bunch of conspiracy theories around this infrastructure fee, but it actually made pretty good sense. So yeah, that communications vacuum and making sure it's not left open, I think is an important part of how we get customers, again, not just engaged, but truly participating with the utility. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to share that goofy story. Anybody else have anything on the customer or the role of the customer before we kind of wind it down here with one final question I'd love to ask you all?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief on it. I guess the challenge I would pose is define customer. And you have your industrial customers, you have your commercial customers, you have your residential customers, you have your investors, which are stakeholders. So is that the right synonymous term? And I think that's the real challenge, is everybody wants exactly what they want. So some are, I want it all from renewable resources. I want it to create local economy. There's very special demands, right? And when you have a traditional rate base and you're in a monopoly, which is a regulated construct, you can't strike certain deals, right? And so there's things that people want to do, and the utilities may want to do it, but you can't, right? There's this regulatory process that may have a hindrance because it could adversely impact low income or a certain part of the community. And I think that's a real challenge, is defining your customer and balancing those needs while getting the outcomes that are best for safety and reliability and the environment and all the core things that we operate under. So I throw that out, as that is becoming more complicated. And I think the input is really good and we're partnering more, but that's the challenging statement. Every entity has a different version of that, but you can't have that information vacuum and succeed in any of those. And so I think that you bring up valid points in your story at the barbecue are real. And I think it's a matter of, informing employees and making sure that everybody understands the why or why not, and is prepared to answer that with accuracy, because even our employees will fill in blanks. Not everybody knows everything. And I think that's a real struggle, especially given that the story changes about once a day. And, the rumor, the joke is, if you haven't heard a rumor by 10 a.m., start one, right? It feels like that's our industry. And so I look at it to say that's a real challenge, is you got most of the story, you're informed, you've been doing it a long time, you think, we need to make sure we do. And that whatever message we're conveying is real, we can stand behind it, but also that we're balancing the different inputs that we work with.
Yeah, one thing you alluded to, Dylan, is when we think about the customer choice. A lot of customers, especially C&I customers, they have choices now they didn't have just a few years ago, and utilities really need to be cognizant of that. So I think that's a very interesting dynamic. One last question. I always call this my crystal ball question, and when I have a bunch of smart people on a panel like we do today, I would like to ask this. It's a very simple, open-ended question, but I think it'll just really be a good way to wrap up today's discussion. What will the utility landscape look like in the year 2030, which used to seem like a long way off, but it's we're only 5 years away. A lot of utilities announced their energy transition goals about 5 years ago, so we're halfway into them in some cases. So just in your humble opinions, what will the landscape look like in 2030? Maybe with just a couple of bullet points from each of you. And Mark, you're more on the training and people into the spectrum. So I'm going to start with you. What are you seeing when you're out there working with your customers?
I think it's just we're some of the customers are on the tip. You know, we got zero carbon initiatives, we got all kinds of, you know, and it's like we're going to be X amount renewal by certain dates, and so it's just they're training that's the staff they're training. They're taking current workforce, they're multitasking, they're retasking, you know, employees, and like Dylan said, some of these projects are out in remote areas. You don't need a lot of people, but you need to find the right person that wants to be there, and it's going to be a reliable person. So I think it's going to look a little bit like the semblance that we're seeing today, as far as the younger workforce that we're bringing in. But it's definitely going to be a different landscape, that's for sure. Because some of the I grew up in the Midwest, so the smokestacks in the sky, you know, there's less and less of them every time I go back home, and so it's going to be more resources closer to home. And then the other thing we really didn't touch on today was where all these data centers going to go, you know, and so.
Oh boy. Yep.
And so all these data centers that are now power producers, and then, you know, and then at some point in time, they're going to oversize, and then are they going to be, you know, are they going to be part of the grid? Are they going to put, you know, and then what are the regulatory requirements going to be on them, or are they still going to be consumers of the grid? So that's something that's also kind of evolving in the market as well. So.
Yeah, in a heavily regulated industry, the points you raise are going to be big ones for sure. For sure. Yeah. Dylan, how about you? What are you seeing in the year 2030 from down there in Tucson?
I say whatever I say now, play it back, it'll be wrong. But my guess is that I think it's still going to be a hustle. It's going to be a rapidly changing environment in 2030. We'll be through probably one or two different narrative sets. We'll have different administrative drivers that'll push things, incentives, you know, the taxes and all the stuff that influences what we do. But I think we'll have a better picture by 2030 of what's really going to happen. But what I think is most important that I would just kind of close with is the global economy around supply chain, where we source things, how we source things, where stuff is manufactured. I think that's going to be the biggest change. And I think we're going to see more pockets of regional and localized manufacturing hubs where that's going to start to get solved in a much more rapid pace, and it's going to be highly competitive, which is good for the market that we're in, because when you have these bottlenecks, it makes everything more expensive and difficult. And so I would say that that's going to be supporting our industry, but a big contributor to the success of what the customers want and affordability. I think that's going to be a significant enhancement by 2030. That would be my guess.
Yep, and affordability is becoming a little bit more than a buzzword as we face some of these challenges. So for sure, yeah. Ahmad, how about you? What are you thinking about 2030?
Yeah, I mean, 2030 is around the corner, and I'll start a rumor here. It's after 10 o'clock, so I haven't really going. But I mean, when you look at the key, you know, I mean, let's stay on the generation. I think in the next 5 years, we'll see more clean energy, right? Could potentially, you know, and it start expanding. I mean, we still have, you know, obviously a lot of generation sources, coal, nuclear, and others. I think may not happen at the pace that we thought. On the grid itself, I think you will see the need for more investments on capacity and resiliency across transmission and distribution. Different regions in the country faced with different, you know, climate change patterns, whether they are hurricanes in my home state of Florida or wildfires on the west, and still flash flooding, and we've seen, you know, the need for more resilient grid. So, and then ultimately, of course, you see new asset classes coming in on the grid. So utilities still trying to figure out the, you know, battery storage, the electric vehicles, the bidirectional electric vehicle being a kind of a load and a source. So I think you're going to have to see a lot of that landscape starting to, you know, manage the interaction between these, you know, new asset classes and kind of the, you know, the whole concept of, you know, the grid as a platform. So I think there will be more maturity both on the system side and the technology. But you're going to have to do all of this while you're trying to manage affordability. So there are going to be more regions impacted with some of these changes than others. My friends at Energy in Louisiana, they're not worried. Well, they're worried, of course, about serving, data centers and everything else, but their main focus is affordability. We're paying premium for a lot of the things that we see in California, but there's going to be a point where, equity is going to drive, investments, planning, and right now, in my opinion, they are not matching up. We still continue to invest, and we need to do a better job while we are incorporating all of these new things. Do it in a more equitable and affordable way to our customers.
Yep, affordability again. Good, very good. Well, listen, I want to thank our panel. I want to thank our audience. Thank the people at HSI and just everyone for being a part of this today. PJ, I'm going to hand it back over to you as we wrap up, and thanks so much to everybody.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, panel. Fantastic presentation. Really appreciate it, and our thoughtful questions from our audience. That was really great, and especially HSI. Again, thanks for making the event possible. For our audience, look for an email from us containing the link to the replay in the next few days. Please also take a moment to complete our survey. At the end of the session, your feedback is greatly appreciated, and we will use it for future sessions. From everyone here at Energy Central and Utility 2030, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on an upcoming power session. Thank you for attending, and this does conclude today's presentation.